Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Shavuos daf Vav. We're going to begin on Vav Amud Aleph, the sixth line. V'hecha shaminan l'Rebbi. So Rabbi Akiva. So we learned in the previous daf, which was a little bit complicated, when it comes to Maris Negoyim, when it comes to Saras, which are different shades of white. In order for someone to be considered Tameh with Saras, there are two, which is four. So we learned that the two, namely, are Avos, and another two are Toldos, secondary to their respective Av. So, the two Avos, one is Beheres and one is Se'es. But Beheres has an Av and a Tolda. Se'es has an Av and it's Tolda. Now Beheres, the Av, which is Beheres, the whitest, most pronounced whiteness is for it to be Aza, very strong, Kishelig, like white, very, very white. That for sure is Tameh. It's the highest level because it's very, very white and it's an Av of Beheres. Now Se'es is also white, but it's not as pronounced, not as white as Beheres. So, Beheres more white than Se'es. The Av of Se'es, as we saw, is when it is Ketsemer Lavan, when it is white like wool. So, even though that is true, that is also an Av, we also have to analyze the Toldos. So when it comes to the order of whiteness, you have an Av of Beheres, which is snow. Then you have an Av of Se'es, which is Tsemer, which is wool. Now you have the next two categories, which are Toldos. Again, we stay consistent that Beheres is stronger than Se'es. But namely, the Tolda of Beheres is more white than the Tolda of Se'es. So the Tolda of Beheres is Tzid, that's like lime or plaster. And lastly, the Tolda of Se'es is Karumbeya, like the membrane of an egg, also white. Now anything less than that level of whiteness is considered to not be Saras. So these are the four categories. Again, you have an Av, which is Av of Beheres, which is Shelig. Number two is an Av of Se'es, which is Semer. Then you have number three, which is a Tolda of Beheres, which is Tzid. And then lastly, you have the Tolda of Se'es, which is Krum Beitza of an egg. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing when it comes to the dinim of Siruf. Because we know in order to become Tameh with Saras, it has to be a certain amount, which namely is the size of a gris, the size of a bean. Now, if one of these is the size of a bean, then you're Tameh. The question is, what if they're two different shades? So the question that we're discussing is Siruf. Can you combine these two to one to be mitzaref to equal a gris? This is where it becomes a little bit complicated. Now, Rabbi Akiva says an interesting point. Now, first of all, let's understand the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are simple. The Rabbanan say that what is allowed for Tziruf? An Av and it's Tolda. So even though it's true, if we look at the four levels, Beheres and the Tolda of Beheres is really the highest level, 1 and 3. Now, even though there's a jump between 1 to 3, it doesn't matter because they're the same category, because they're both Beheres. So even though one's an Av, one's a Tolda, and the Tolda, there's something in between it of higher level of whiteness, it's still Mitzaref. 1 and 3 will be Mitzaref. So too, when it comes to the din of Se'es, that Semer and Beitza, because they're that one is an Av and it's Tolda, they will also be Mitzaref. Now, Rabbi Akiva, interestingly enough, says something different. He says that it's when it's Zulam al Mazu, Zulam al Mazu, it's necessary that only one which is just this very similar shade of color, if you will, going from one to the next, but not one which will jump from one to another. And therefore, let's just see the language of this Gemara on the previous daf. He says as follows: it can't be like Rabbi Kiva. Kivan diar mezul mal mezu, mezul mal mezu. He says that one is whiter than the other, only going to go up one step. You can't jump up two. So you can't heart that sid heichel mitzarf. The truth is that sid heichel, which is the number 3 slot, which is the tolda seis, cannot combine. So bahadi man litzrufe bahadi beheres. So if you would want to connect it to beheres, ika seis deadifimine. Now again, according to the Rabbanan, they would allow you to jump from 3 to 1 because they're the same. They're the same category of beheres. But according to Rabbi Kiva, he implies that you can only go one step above. So if you can only go one step above, then number 3, which is the tzid, should not combine to 1. So that's apparently what Rabbi Kiva will hold, that go from 1 to 3 will not work. However, then you can say, well, 1 second. Well, if you can go one to the next, that's what Rabbi Kiva says. So he said he wouldn't be able to even go up from 3 to 2 to the Av of Seis, because Sid is a Tolda of Beheres. So they're two totally separate things. One's Seis and one is Beheres. So you wouldn't be able to combine the two colors to equal a gris if one's a Seis and one's Beheres. It's necessary that they both have to be linked. But you should also not be able to connect an Av and its Tolda. So you say, well, in second, apparently, according to Rabbi Kiva, you would also not be able to include the 4th one. Now, according to the Rabbanan, you would be able to compare the 4 to 2, because even though it's a double jump, if you will, it's not like checkers, it's not a problem because they're both seis. However, according to Rabbi Kiva, he says it has to be one above the other. So apparently you can say the same thing when it comes to this. Because so because you have number 3 in between 4 and 2, so you wouldn't be able to combine them, even though, again, they're both seis. But Rabbi Kiva says it could only go up 1, not a double jump. And it wouldn't be able to link to another tolda, right, which is right. Number 4 is next to number 3, but it's another tolda. It's not the same. It's not linked to the same thing, because again, Beitza is seis and Sid is Beheres. So therefore, so you can say the same thing. Why are you picking on Sid? You could say the same kasha about Beitza. So we end up saying Haimai Bishlam and the Bloit Sid Heichel Krum Beitza Lo Kasha. You can ask a kasha. The Avgad Krum Beitza Metatoy the Seis. This is interesting. Even though it's true, Rabbi Kiva holds that you can't make a double jump, but that's only for Beheres, not for Seis. Why? Because the Torah says Lo Seis Lo Sapachas Safachas Tfeil Lo Seis. So it shows us that when it comes to ace, there is this link of a reboy to be mitzaref when it comes to seis. Now, even though, again, when it comes to Beitza and Semer, they're a double jump, but apparently because of this reboy, it's not a problem, right? So that would be allowed. Even though, again, it's a big jump from 4 to 2. Sid Heichel Kasha. However, again, Sid Heichel should, according to Rabbi Kiva, is a kasha, because Sid should never be able to be mitzaref. And our Mishnah's mashma, the fact that it says Shtaim Shein Rabah, is linking an Av to a Tolda, and therefore it should be a mitzaref. And that's why we end up concluding in yesterday's daf, Mechvort Mastis no Rabbi Kiva. Okay. So that's how we understand that our Mishnah is not like the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Needed to kind of do that in order to be able to continue with this sugya. And hopefully, for those that heard yesterday's daf, to have a little bit of rachmanis if I made a couple mistakes in the reading. The Heicha Shamin Rabbi Akiva Zum al Mazu. So where do we find this concept that he holds you can only go up one step to be mitzaref? So Ilema Mehadasanya, we want like this. This is Rabbi Yosi Shol Yeshua B'nai Shol Rabbi Akiva. He asked the Kash Rabbi Akiva Minima Amru Mars Negoyim Shem Shein Rabba. So he said, what exactly is what exactly does this mean? Shtaim Shein Rabba. What exactly do we see this? And again, Rashi explains, how do we see the Rabbi Akiva's kopid a seder milas atziruf? That it's not just enough an av and it's tolda, but it has to be like the next one. So, how do we see this? So Amr Lo said, "Im lav ma yamru." So if not, so if we're looking at Yoshua ben Nosh Rabbi Akiva, who Yoshua ben Karcha? This is referring to Yoshua ben Karcha. Okay. So Mipnima can mafarish ma'vi also yamru mikrum. So v'im lav ma yomru. So machzer haya shemafarish mahu shoyel. So he's basically explaining what are you asking? Yomru mikrum beitza, which krum beitza, which is the lowest level, ulamala tame, and anything above it is tame. Says Rashi, achar she'ein lanu choluk b'maris luvin ulamala mikrum beitza. El dalad maris halolu. Since you only have these four colors, anything less than that color is no longer negoyim. Yomu kol mara luban. Say all of them shehu mikrum ulamala tame. All you have to do is just push it. Say that in a very simple way, as the Gemara Pesachim says, la'oy mishana adam talmidu derech ketzara. So why are you mentioning all these things? This higher shade, this higher shade. Just mention the lowest shade of white, which is krum beitza, and that would be enough. So why does it need to mention the step number, the one which is 3, one which is 2, one which is 1? Why does it need to mention that? Just tell us the lowest level of what constitutes as whiteness for saras, and then we know anything above, anything which is more white certainly would count. So Yomer Krum Beitza L'Mala, Tame. So that's all you need to say, right? And no more, right? You don't have to add all of this. So Amr Lo, so he said, Lomar Shemitztarfim Zeh. The reason why we need to mention them is, as we said, was at the end of yesterday's daf, but I read it again, is that we need to have this order, because what if we don't have all of them the exact same shade of color of white? So the question is, can these different colors be mitzdarf? That's the reason why we need to know them. So Amrlo, v'yomer mekum beitzel mala tame. Just say this very light shade of white, let's just say it that way, is tame. Umitzdarfin zeim zeh, and that it's going to be mitzdarf with anything above it. So why doesn't it just say that? So Amrlo, lomocha kol kayin shenu baki behen uvishmoisein enu royas and goyim. To tell us the important idea that if a kohen is not a baki in all of the names, then he's not allowed to be involved in this process of determining whether this person is tami or not. Now the il masid heichel lamala loy kaimar. So he's only asking questions about beya, which again was the told of seis, but didn't mention anything about sid. Loy kaimar. Loy ermele shemamina deshmiele Rabbi Akiva dirmakuhu bahadi seis mitzdarfen. It must be that he holds that when it comes to seis, it is mitzdarf, namely number the beitza and the tzemer, right? The beitza and the tzemer is mitzdarf because they are linked to one another, and as we saw, because it says l'seis l'sapachas. So v'dil m'seis v'tol data, v'heres v'tol data. Maybe it's only coming to tell you an av and it's tolda, but who says that necessarily you can even go up one step above? So in other words, all that would have told you is that, like the Rabbanan said, that an av and its tolda are linked, but not necessarily can it go from one step up to the next. Like for example, number 2 and number 1, right? One av and its other av, maybe not. So you have 4 cups of milk, which of course is white. One shildam, one has 2 drops of blood, the film. One has 4 shildam. 8 of blood. Maybe 16 makes more sense. It's proportional. Now, if you look at them, because you have a nice tall glass of milk, even though there's a couple of drops of blood, or maybe 10 little drops of blood, it's still considered to be white. It's still considered to be like milk. It's just telling you that one is like a little bit more more white than other. In other words, if it's completely there's only a couple drops of redness in it, it retains its strong whiteness of its milk. However, if you start diluting it with other colors, it will still look white, but it'll be a different shade of white. So therefore, the notion of mentioning this concept is just to emphasize this idea that one is more than the other, and that's the same thing. That's why he holds there's these four orders, which again we talked about of this particular these different shades. Okay, let's just see if there's a question over here. So yesterday we saw Ezamar Mitzarf im Beheres. What combines with Beheres? Now it's pretty clean when it says Beheres. That's mashma. It's probably we're talking about, let's say, the Av of Beheres, which is shell egg. So as we said, Beheres Yesh is what I wrote for question 1 TB1. Beheres Yesh Av Shehu Lavan Keshel egg. Lefi the Rabbanan Hu Mitzaref L'Tolda Shoot Sid. Right. So according to the Rabbanan, shell egg and sid are combined. Alpha Bishu Shlishi Abel Hu Tolda. Fine. And according to Rabbi Kiva, who Maisiv Shiachel Mitzaref Imadavar Samachla Shu Av the Sapachas. I wrote Sapachas. That's certainly not the right word. I should say the Seis. Shehu Lavan Ketsemer. Okay, I got everything else right. I just wrote that one word wrong. So according to Rabbi Kiva, maybe you would jump up one Av to the other Av. Okay. Okay, that's pretty good actually. But that's not only what we were looking for. Let's see. Yesterday's daf. Let's just understand this cleanly. Question 3.1. We said Eilu Maris Medal Maris and the Goyim Mitzarfin in Mara Ketsemer Lavan. So Tsemer Lavan, which is number 2. So according to the Rabbanan, certainly number 2 is going to combine to the Tolda of Beya, Krum Beya, because it's Tolda, right? They're both Se'es, one's an Av, one's a Tolda. And in addition to that, shell egg, which is the strongest, it certainly will be mitzaref to the stronger one, right? The stronger one is definitely going to be mitzaref to the lighter one. So number 4 definitely, because they're both, according to the Rabbanan, because they're linked together, and even according to Rabbi Kiva, actually, we said because of the pasuk. The whole question is about 3 by the Tolda of Sid, because the Tolda of Sid is not the same as the Beheres. Sid is a Tolda of Seis. So maybe they don't combine, or because it's 3-2 and they're right next to each other, maybe they do combine. 3b Elo Mars Madal Mars Nagam Mistarfin Im Mar Sid Hechel. It's unbelievable that you'd have to actually remember this cold for your test. It's very hard to hold cup here, but this is what you have to do. So when it comes to Sid Hechel, in this case it's number 3. This becomes a little bit more problematic. So according to Rabbanan, certainly shell egg, because one's Av, one's Tolda, but according to that's that. And Rabbi Kiva will say Semer, because it's next to each other. Okay. All right. So that's that question. Let's keep on moving. So we have these different colors of blood, so it's still milk. So Amos Hashem was Rabbi Kiva bipatoch biftoich becholaik mishaman lei. Okay, so maybe let's just look in Rashi. So maybe the only time he says this is ma'urav, who, if it's mixed together, who nagalavan adum demikasav b'tayra. That's like all mixed together. The mikaimer shenafla taychay, it fell into a tipe dam. Mechal de bepoich kaimer, it was like mixed in. So maybe that's when we would say, because there's actually mixed. But b'chaloik, right here, over here, they're just like they're next to each other. They're not like mixed in. They're 2 different colors. So how would he necessarily say that? Which again is like when they're mixed, when it's mixed together. Just like we said, blood and milk's mixed together. Let's say it again. Understand, how do we even know when it's mixed together that this is the din? This could Adam dem shebezev shebezeh ki yayin hamozoig b'mayim. So he says like this. Let's look at Rashi. If you have this redness that's mixed in together like wine, so he said it's ki yayin hamozoig. It's like diluted wine, diluted water. Says Rashi. Al karchach al rishon v'sheni kaimer shekain lashon mishnah v'hachi kaimer adam dem sheberishon. The redness of the first one, Mesheni Simin Psichas Oidim, Shebehem Nichras B'Makam Tipas Dam B'Cholov, Umarehen. It's when you have blood in milk. Umarin Lo Edaim, it's not red. Lo Lavon, it's not really white. El Kiyayin Hamozoig, it's considered to be like diluted wine. V'Sivivavov. So in other words, it's not necessarily comparable because he's only saying that it's not considered like whiteness, but rather it's considered like this diluted wine. Ella shel baheres aza kishel v'shel sid. Ella shel baheres aza. When it comes to baheres aza kisheleg, which again is the strongest level of whiteness, v'shel sid, and sid, which is diha himena, which is like weaker than it, right? It's or less white than it. Okay, V'im, as we continue to Vavom and Beis, V'im isa shel tsemer diha himenu miboile. It should say that tsemer is weaker than it. In other words, it's true, of course, sid is weaker than sheleg, but tsemer is the next stage, right? So Amri and Achinami, you're right. That of course is true. That Semer is really the next one, which is just a little less white than Sheleg, as opposed to Tzid. So Vasanya, Rabbi Nassan Omer, Loshem Rabbi Kiva Shel Tzid Deha Himena. It's not that the plaster or this lime is less white, El Shel Tzemer Deha Himena. Rather, it's the Tzemer which is, and therefore that's what we're saying. So Manolan the Beheres Azahi, how do we know that Beheres is actually the most powerful whiteness of them all? So Rabbi Amar Krav Yim Beheres Lavanahi. It says that the Beheres is white, which is Hi Lavana of Ein Acheres Lavana. If you want to compare whiteness to anything else, Beheres is the most, because the pasuk says it's Beheres Lavana, is mamish the most white. Okay. Tanuban Beheres Amuka. When we say the word Beheres, it refers to a deepness or inside the skin. V'cheinu oimer umari omoik min ha'or. Kimari chama ha'amuka min hatzel. Just like the appearance of the sun, which is deeper than shade. Se'es, ein se'es el gavoa. The language of se'es means it's raised darker. It's raised a darker shade white. V'cheinu oimer al kol haharim haramim, all the mountains, the al kol hagvois, and all the valleys, and noisais, sapachas. Ein sapachas el tfela. So sapachas, another interpretation, another word, sapachas is tfela, which is a secondary shade of white. V'cheinu oimer v'yarmer safachti na. So ashkachan tfela latseis. I understand sapachas is less than seis. Tvela beheres manolan. How do we know that sapachas is lower than seis? Amar Rabbi Zera nemru lavana b'seis. It says lavana by seis. V'nemru lavana b'beheres. Malaholan hamur b'seis seish l'tvela. Just like when it came to seis, there's something less than it, namely sapachas. Af lavana hamur b'beheres seish l'tvela. So too when it comes to Beheres, there's something less than it, which is seis. So you basically have Beheres, seis, and sapachas. B'masnisa tana hitol kasav sapachas ben seis and Beheres. Put sapachas in between seis and Beheres. Loimelcha kashem shetfeil at seis katfeil Beheres. Just like it's secondary to seis, also the Beheres. Seis ketsemer lavan. So he says seis. Its av is wool, white wool. So my tsemer lavan. Amar Rabibi, Amar Ravasi, tsemer naki. ben Yomi. It's referring to this wool, which is very clean, of like a new animal. Shemichavnin boy lemilus. Says Rashi, Loshain harachelim yotzos kivoinais. It's like it's these new young animals are going out, like for the first time. So, fine. That's basically what we're looking for. So the Rabbanan who said, again, that an Av is linked to its Tolda, can be compared to Litrei Malchi, Litrei Ifruche. You have two kings and two governors. Malchus Shel Zeh, one king is Lamal Malchus Shel Zeh. One king is more powerful than another king. So you have king number one, you have king number two, which is comparable to the Bahares Av, which is the Sheleg, and then you have the Seis Av, which is Semer, which are like the two kings, if you will. But there's also governors. Fine. And one governor is more powerful than the other governor. So again, it's like, you have these two toldos, these two governors, if you will. All right. Who? However, the weaker king is stronger than the stronger governor. And the king is more powerful than his own governor. So therefore, basically, it's the same thing. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, but the truth is that both kings are more powerful, but they're of two different countries. However, the governor, the more powerful governor, is linked to the first more powerful king. And therefore, because of that, 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 combine when it comes to these dinim, right? And Av and its Tolda are mitzdarf. Rav Adam Rabo Emer Kagoin Malka V'al Kapata Rafila Varesh Galusa. So you have these different positions. Malka V'akaf, Rashi says Shnei Malachim Heim, and they're two kings who Malka Choshev Me Al Kafta. So it's another position of power, and again, it's comparable to like a governor or some official. V'reish Galusa. Haizel Amal Mizeh, who, so one is higher than the other. El Kagoin Malka V'roifila V'al Kapata. V'reish Galusa. Rabbi Emer Kagoin Shvor Malka V'Kaisar. It's comparable to Shvor Malka and the Caesar. Says Rashi, Shvor Malka is the Melch Pras. He was the king of Persia. V'Kaisar Melch Roimi. They were both kings. The whole Echad Yeshlo Ifrichus. Each of them had their own set of governments. So you had one which is more powerful than the other, but they were both kings. So which one is more powerful, the Caesar of Rome or the Shvor Malka of the Persians? So who's more powerful? So Malay be Chorshe Ka'achale Pukchazi Tiva Deman Sagi Ba'alma. So says Rashi, Ha'ish Hazeh Mutim Biyirim Kol Yamav, a person who is like hiding in the forest, Kol Yamav, all of his days, Shloshama Betiva Shel Malchus Raimi, because they never wanted to speak any goodness about the king. V'chutzrach Lishoel Zois, and needed to ask this question. Rapapa Mishum de Akdim Rava Shvar Malka Kesar Hudeshale. The whole question is why, when he framed it, did he first mention, for example, Shvar Malka and then Kesar, right? So it's interesting that he mentioned Shvar Malka before Kesar. So he thought it must be because the Shvar Malka, that king of Persia, is more powerful than the Caesar of Rome, because otherwise why did he frame it that way? So Hudeshai, Rava, Mira miyira asa. He only did this out of fear, shaya tachta b'malchusai, because he was under the malchus of Shvar Malka. So therefore, he mentioned Shvar Malka first, but the truth is, it's not necessarily because Shvar Malka is more powerful. Okay, so b'chor sheika'achale, with deafness you're eating, pukchazi tiva deman sagi ba'alma, dechsev v'toichel kol ara, they consume from the earth, v'toishna v'tid kana. Okay, Amar Rav Yochanan Zu Roimi, this is referring to the Rome, Chayev Shetiva Yotz B'cholam Kuloi. So, says Rashi, Targum Shel Russia. So it's the wicked Roman army that basically tragedy came forth from them. Ravina Amar going Galima the Amr V'shache Sedina the Kisna V'shachke. Says Rashi, Shaha Chodesh Lavan Harbe Mashal Yashan Ava Hachadasha Shalzu V'Shalzu Kurovos Leo Shavos. Okay, Kach Babaheres Gavoa Harbe Minatzid Shehu Toldaso V'Hashna Minakrum. Okay. Anyway, so this was a whole debate of who's more powerful. But again, the whole point is that according to the Rabbanan, each governor follows his own king. So too each of the two toldos follows its own av. Rabbi Kiva holds the two kings follow the two governors. They follow each. The two governors follow each of the two kings, and the two kings follow each other. Right? They follow each other. The two governors follow each other, and the two governors follow the lowest king. So therefore, again, it links basically 3-2 is the whole question. Question 4. Ma pirish se'es, ma pirish sapachas, amurim beparshas maris negoyim. So what does it mean when we say se'es? What does it mean when we say sapachas? So se'es, let's find this over here. Ein se'es el gavoa. So se'es is a language of it being lifted up. Because anything which is darker has the appearance that it's raised up a darker shade of white. Se'es shikeya mibaheres. When it comes to se'es, let's find this. That's sapachas. Where is this? Baharis and this. So se'es is keya mibaharis. Se'es is weaker than baharis. Kuri gavoa mimenu. That's why it says it's gavoya. Sapachas hainu tfeila. The word sapachas just means secondary. So in sapachas ela tfeila. So that's what we learn out. Verivta Taira Maran Naisif Tafel at Seis Mulitzarf Gris. So again, when it comes to the end of Tziruf, that's the reason why we need to know which one is stronger than the other. Adkan.